Look, I'm not saying the Galactic Military Academy was a joke. But when your most prestigious institution gets absolutely terrorized by a pack of kindergarteners, you might want to reconsider your recruitment standards. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me paint you a picture of the day that 3-foot-tall apex predators made grown cadets cry, and how one very tired human teaching assistant made it everyone else's problem. The Galactic Military Academy, according to YouTube analytics, 99.3% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. Or GMA, as literally nobody called it, because that sounds like a cheap grocery store brand. Was supposed to be the pinnacle of military excellence. The best of the best. The cream of the crop. The place where future commanders learn to command, future strategists learn to strategize, and future heroes learn to hero all over the place. It was built on Station Harmony, a massive orbital platform that housed representatives from 47 different species, and it had never, not once in its 200-year history, had to deal with anything quite like the Krellian cubs. Now, Krellians are what happens when evolution looks at a wolf, a bear, and a particularly aggressive honey badger, throws them in a blender, adds some space magic, and hits puree. They stand about 8 feet tall when fully grown, have retractable claws that can shred through standard hull plating, and possess a bite force that makes hydraulic presses jealous. They're apex predators from a death world that makes Australia look like a petting zoo. Naturally, they make excellent military officers. Terrifying, absolutely, but excellent. What nobody had really considered, and I mean really sat down and thought about, was what baby Krellians would be like. The cubs had arrived as part of a cultural exchange program, because apparently someone in the Galactic Council had eaten paint chips as a child, and thought it would be a fantastic idea to bring predator toddlers to a space station full of prey species. 12 Krellian cubs, each about 3 feet tall, covered in fluffy fur that made them look deceptively adorable, with big eyes and tiny fangs that could still absolutely ruin your day. They were supposed to be supervised by their caretakers and then kept in the civilian education sector. Supposed to being the key phrase there. Because Krellian cubs, much like human toddlers, have a natural talent for chaos that borders on supernatural. Except Krellian cubs have claws and pack-hunting instincts. It started on a Tuesday, because of course it did. Nothing good ever happens on a Tuesday. The first incident occurred in the main cafeteria, a sprawling space that could hold 3,000 cadets and staff. Lieutenant Vexillar, a Thalaxian cadet with the kind of confidence that comes from having never met a real predator, was enjoying his lunch. Thalaxians are herbivores, tall and reedy with crystalline skin that refracts light in pretty patterns. Very peaceful, very gentle, very much not equipped to handle what was about to happen. Vexillar had just taken his tray, loaded with various greens and protein supplements that smelled like grass clippings and disappointment, and sat down at his usual table. He was probably thinking about strategy exercises, or maybe about that cute medical student in his xenobiology class. He was definitely not thinking about the 12 pairs of predatory eyes watching him from beneath the serving tables. The cubs struck with the precision of a military operation, which was ironic considering where they were. One moment, Vexillar was reaching for his beverage. The next moment, a small furry missile had launched itself onto the table, grabbed his entire tray, and disappeared back under the table before he could even process what happened. His mouth was still open, hand frozen in mid-reach, brain desperately trying to catch up with reality. Then he heard the growling. Not aggressive growling, mind you. Happy growling. The sound of small predators absolutely demolishing his lunch under the table while making sounds of pure joy. Vexillar did what any sensible prey species would do when confronted with a pack of feeding predators. He slowly stood up, backed away, and went to get another tray, hoping maybe this was a one-time thing. Spoiler alert, it was not a one-time thing. By the time Vexillar returned with his second lunch, the cubs had expanded their operation. They developed a system, a terrifyingly efficient system. Some cubs would spot a target, others would create a distraction, and a strike team would move in for the acquisition. They were running a military-grade lunch theft operation, and they were getting better at it by the minute. Cadet Plix, a Corellian with 6 arms and exactly 0 survival instincts, tried to protect his food by holding onto it with all 6 hands. The cubs simply climbed up his arms like furry little parkour experts and stole the food directly from his grip. He sat there afterward, all 6 hands empty, looking like someone who just had their understanding of physics personally violated. Ensign Kreechaw attempted to eat while hovering 3 feet off the ground, using her species' natural levitation abilities. The cubs responded by stacking on top of each other like the world's most dangerous totem pole and jumping. She dropped her food in surprise, and they caught it before it hit the ground. It was actually kind of impressive. The cafeteria descended into chaos. Cadets were holding their trays above their heads, creating protective formations, trying to eat while constantly looking over their shoulders. Some had given up entirely and were just standing against the walls, hungry and defeated. The cubs were having the time of their lives, their little tails wagging as they accumulated a feast under the tables. And where, you might ask, was security during all this? Great question. Security had taken one look at the situation, remembered that Krellian cubs are the offspring of a species that regularly produces decorated military officers, and decided that this was, quote, above their pay grade. Station security is trained to handle drunk cadets, unauthorized visitors, and the occasional escaped laboratory animal. They are not trained to handle tiny apex predators with diplomatic immunity. Enter Commander Jakara, the station's duty officer for the day. Jakara was a by-the-book Centauri, which is a species that looks like someone crossed a bird with a very serious accountant. He had read every manual, memorized every protocol, and had absolutely no idea what protocol covered predator cubs stealing lunch. He tried reasoning with them. He stood at the entrance to the cafeteria and called out in his most authoritative voice, "Young ones, you must cease this activity immediately. This is in violation of Station Regulations 47.3, subsection Delta, which clearly states." A juice box sailed through the air and hit him in the face. Not thrown aggressively, mind you. One of the cubs had just grabbed it, found it uninteresting, and yeeted it in a random direction. That random direction happened to be Jakara's face. The cubs chittered with laughter. That's what Krellian cubs sound like when they laugh, sort of a chittering chirp that would be adorable if you weren't actively being terrorized by them. Jakara retreated, dignity bruised, face sticky with synthetic fruit beverage, to figure out his next move. By lunch period 2, word had spread. The cubs had taken the cafeteria. Some enterprising cadets tried to sneak food out before the cubs could strike. This worked exactly once before the cubs learned to patrol the exits. Others tried eating in their quarters, but the cubs had somehow figured out the ventilation system and were crawling through the ducts like fuzzy little xenomorphs. The situation had escalated from minor inconvenience to full-blown crisis. Cadets were going hungry. Morale was plummeting. One cadet, a normally stoic Vrellian, was found sitting in a hallway, clutching an empty lunch container and muttering, "They're so fast, so very fast." The cadet social forums were exploding with posts. Has anyone successfully eaten today? I saw them take down a full meal from a Thorgian. A Thorgian! Those guys are 600 pounds of muscle. My roommate tried to hide a sandwich in his jacket. They found it. Don't ask me how. They just knew. Admiral Krothos, the station commander, was in his office fielding calls from increasingly panicked staff members. No, we cannot call in an orbital strike. No, I don't care if they stole your lunch and your dignity. No, we cannot classify this as a hostile invasion. They're children. Yes, terrifying children, but still children. The Krellian diplomatic liaison was apologetic, but also not very helpful. Oh, young cubs are so spirited, she said, with what could only be described as parental pride. On our homeworld, we simply let them hunt. It builds character. This is a space station, Krothos replied, several of his mandibles twitching with stress. We cannot let them hunt. Have you tried giving them more food? She suggested. They're stealing the food we're giving them. Meanwhile, in the teaching wing of the station, completely oblivious to the cafeteria crisis, was Lieutenant Commander Maya Okonquo, human teaching assistant for advanced tactical theory. Maya had been at the academy for 2 years, teaching cadets who were often twice her size and 3 times as confident. She was 5'6" of pure, unimpressed energy, with dark skin, close-cropped hair, and the kind of expression that suggested she had seen everything and was not impressed by any of it. Maya had grown up on Earth, specifically in a large family with 7 younger siblings and cousins who were convinced that chaos was a lifestyle choice. She had broken up fights over toys, negotiated treaties over video game controllers, and once prevented a full-scale civil war over the last cookie. She was a veteran of the childhood trenches, and while her official specialty was tactics, her real skill was dealing with nonsense. She'd missed lunch because of back-to-back lectures and was now in her office, grading papers and wondering why Cadet Tachon thought that ram the enemy ship really hard counted as a tactical analysis. She was reaching for her thermos of coffee, that blessed beverage that humans had introduced to the galaxy and that everyone agreed was either the best or worst thing to happen to productivity, when her comm unit started screaming. Not literally screaming, but the sheer number of incoming messages made it seem like it wanted to. She scrolled through them. Cafeteria compromised. Food supplies critical. Morale at all-time low. Request immediate assistance from any personnel with Predator experience. Maya frowned. Predator experience? She opened the attached video file and watched security footage of the Cubs in action. She watched them coordinate an ambush on a cadet 3 times their size. She watched them problem-solve in real time, adapting their tactics to different situations. She watched them celebrate their victories with happy little pounces. And then Maya did something nobody expected. She smiled. Not a happy smile, mind you. The smile of someone who recognized the game because she'd played it before. The smile of an older sibling who dealt with younger siblings pulling exactly this kind of nonsense for years. She saved her work, stood up, grabbed her coffee, and headed for the cafeteria. When Maya arrived, the scene was somehow even worse than the video had suggested. The cafeteria looked like a disaster zone. Empty trays were scattered across tables. Several cadets were attempting to eat while standing on chairs. One brave, or possibly foolish soul was trying to defend his meal with a textbook, holding it like a shield while slowly backing toward the exit. The Cubs had grown bolder. They weren't even hiding anymore. They were just strutting around the cafeteria floor like they owned the place, which, to be fair, they basically did at this point. Commander Jakara spotted Maya and rushed over, his feathers ruffled in distress. "Lieutenant Commander, thank goodness. We've tried everything. They won't respond to orders, they won't respond to treats, they won't respond to anything." Maya took a long sip of her coffee and surveyed the situation. "Where are their caretakers?" "They've been trying to catch them for the past hour. The cubs keep evading them." "Of course they do," Maya muttered. She watched as one of the cubs successfully convinced a cadet to put down his tray in exchange for getting to pet the cub's fluffy head. The moment the cadet bent down, another cub swooped in and grabbed the tray. Classic misdirection. She had to admit, it was pretty smart. "Right," Maya said, handing her coffee to Jakara, who took it automatically. "Watch this." She walked to the center of the cafeteria. Didn't rush, didn't shout. Just walked calmly to the middle of the chaos, stood there, and waited. Some of the cubs noticed her. A human. They'd seen humans before. Humans were neither prey nor predator in the traditional sense. They were weird. They ate everything. They had forward-facing eyes, but no claws. They were persistence hunters from a death world. But they also made friends with literally any creature that held still long enough. Humans were confusing. Maya stood there, arms crossed, and then she did something that made every predator in the room, cub or otherwise, go absolutely still. She cleared her throat. Not a polite little ahem. A throat clear. The kind of sound that carries weight. The kind of sound that bypasses the thinking part of the brain and goes straight to the oh part. It was a sound that said, "I am not angry. I am disappointed, and that's so much worse." Every single cub froze. Mid-step, mid-chew, mid-whatever they were doing. Ears perked up, eyes wide. That universal expression of, "Did we just mess up?" that transcends species. The cafeteria went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. You could have heard a quiet thought. You could have heard someone's dignity growing back. Maya looked at the cubs. The cubs looked at Maya. And then she did it. She raised one eyebrow, one single eyebrow, the universal gesture of parental judgment that has stopped kids in their tracks since the dawn of time. "Really?" Maya said, her voice not loud but somehow filling the entire space. "Really? Is this what we're doing today?" One of the cubs, a little thing with gray fur and the biggest eyes, slowly put down the sandwich it had been holding. Another cub, this one with brown fur and what looked like bits of lettuce on its face, took several steps backward. Maya walked forward slowly, and the pack of cubs parted for her like the galaxy's furriest sea. She reached the main pile of stolen goods, the hoard of lunches they'd accumulated under the center table. She looked at it. Looked at them. Raised that eyebrow again. "Whose idea was this?" she asked. The cubs all looked at each other. Then, in a move that would have been hilarious if everyone wasn't too shocked to laugh, they all pointed to the biggest cub, a fluffy troublemaker with black fur and a white patch over one eye. The big cub's ears went flat. Its tail drooped. It made a small sound that somehow sounded like it was funny, though. "Oh, I'm sure it was," Maya said, in the tone of someone who was definitely not sure it was. "And how many cadets didn't get to eat because of your funny idea?" The cub looked around the cafeteria, seeing all the empty trays and hungry faces for the first time. Its ears drooped even more. Maya crouched down, getting to eye level with the pack. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to take all this food, and you're going to figure out who you took it from, and you're going to give it back. And then you're going to apologize." One of the smaller cubs made a sound that was probably, "But we already ate some of it." Then you're going to help them get new food, and you're going to carry their trays to their tables, and you're going to sit quietly while they eat. The cubs looked at each other, having a silent conversation that only pack animals can have. The big cub looked back at Maya, who had not moved, had not blinked, and still had that eyebrow up. The cub made a decision. It reached down, picked up a lunch container, and walked over to the nearest cadet. Head down, tail still drooped. It offered the container up with the universal body language of, "I'm sorry." The other cubs, seeing their leader comply, quickly followed suit. Within minutes, there was a parade of apologetic predator cubs returning stolen lunches and making sorry sounds. One cub approached the Thalaxian cadet, Vexillar, who was pressed against the wall looking like he'd seen his life flash before his eyes. The cub held up his tray, chirped apologetically, and then did something that made everyone's heart simultaneously melt and break. It gently bumped its head against Vexillar's leg in the Krellian gesture of apology. Vexillar, to his credit, slowly reached down and patted the cub's head. It's okay, small one." The cafeteria staff, who had been hiding in the kitchen, started bringing out fresh food. The cubs, true to Maya's word, helped carry trays. A 3-foot-tall apex predator, carefully balancing a lunch tray while walking on hind legs, is simultaneously the most adorable and most surreal thing you'll ever see. Maya supervised, arms still crossed, that eyebrow still raised. When one cub started to get distracted by something shiny, she just cleared her throat again. The cub immediately snapped back to attention and continued with its task. By the time the cubs had finished helping, the cafeteria was almost back to normal. Cadets were eating. Order was restored. The cubs sat in a small group near Maya, looking tired and maybe a little bit proud of having helped fix their mess. The Krellian diplomatic liaison burst into the cafeteria, along with 3 harried-looking caretakers. "The cubs, where are—" She stopped, seeing all 12 sitting quietly next to the human teaching assistant. "They're right here," Maya said calmly. "We had a discussion about respecting other people's food." The liaison stared. The caretakers stared. Commander Jakara, still holding Maya's coffee, stared. "How did you—" The liaison began. 7 younger siblings, Maya said, as if that explained everything. Which, for anyone who dealt with children, it did. "Also, I'm from Earth. We've been dealing with pack hunters since before we invented fire. We just usually made friends with them afterward." One of the cubs chirped up at her. Maya looked down at it and sighed. "Yes, fine. You did good helping fix things." She reached into her pocket and pulled out something nobody expected her to have. Cookies. Actual Earth cookies that she'd been saving for after her shift. She broke them into pieces and handed them out. The cubs accepted them with gentle mouths, making happy sounds. One of them curled up against her leg, looking content. "They're not bad," Maya said, more to herself than anyone else. "They're just bored and nobody was setting boundaries. Cubs need structure. Doesn't matter if they're human dog or apex predators from a death world. Same principle." The liaison seemed torn between being offended and being impressed. "We do set boundaries." "Yeah, but did you enforce them when they pushed?" Maya asked. "Because these little ones are smart. Really smart. They saw everyone backing down and figured the rules didn't apply to them. Someone just needed to make it clear that rules do apply, even to them." She gestured at the cubs. "Look at them. They're tired, they're fed, they helped fix their mistake, and now they know where the line is. Tomorrow, they'll probably be perfect angels, or, as close to angels as baby apex predators can be." The big cub with the white patch looked up at Maya with what could only be described as hero worship. It made a sound that the translator rendered as, "Can you be our teacher?" Maya laughed, a real genuine laugh. Oh, no, 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 no. I teach tactics to cadets who are supposed to know better. Not. She looked at the cubs. Although, you know what? Your ambush coordination was actually pretty solid. Textbook stuff. Misdirection, teamwork, target selection. If you weren't stealing food, I'd give you a passing grade. The cubs perked up at the praise. One of them started showing her how they'd planned the table attack with enthusiastic gestures and excited chirps. Okay, yeah, flanking maneuver, good choice, Maya said, nodding seriously. And the stacking thing to reach the floating cadet? Creative problem solving, I like it. Jakara approached carefully, still holding the coffee. Lieutenant Commander, how did you know this would work? Maya took her coffee back and shrugged. Kids are kids. Doesn't matter if they're human toddlers or Krellian cubs. They test boundaries. They push until someone pushes back with actual authority. You can't just tell them to stop. You have to show them you mean it. And then you have to follow through. Also helps if they think you're not scared of them. You weren't scared? Asked one of the caretakers, incredulous. Maya took a sip of her coffee. Terrified. But you never let them see that. First rule of dealing with predators, human or otherwise. Never show fear. Second rule is always have snacks. Third rule is be consistent with consequences. She looked at the cubs. Speaking of consequences, you're all going to help in the cafeteria for the next week. Cleaning tables, helping serve food. You wanted to be involved with lunch? Now you're involved. Think of it as community service. The cubs didn't look thrilled, but they didn't argue. The big one bumped its head against Maya's hand, accepting the terms. Over the next week, the cubs became the cafeteria's most unusual helpers. They cleaned tables with more enthusiasm than expertise, carefully carried trays for cadets who asked nicely and generally behaved themselves. They'd found structure and boundaries, and weirdly enough, they seemed happier for it. Cadets who had been terrified of them started finding them endearing. Vexilar, the Thalaxian who'd lost his lunch first, became particularly attached to the cub who'd apologized to him. He'd save bits of his meal to share, teaching the cub about herbivore food. The cub would sit next to him during meals, acting as a very fuzzy, very deadly if necessary protector. Maya became something of a legend. The human who tamed the cubs with just a throat clear became a story that spread through the academy. Cadets who'd been there swore it was true. Those who hadn't thought it was exaggerated. But everyone agreed that you did not want to be on the receiving end of Lieutenant Commander Okonquo's disappointed eyebrow raise. The best part came 2 weeks later during a tactical exercise. The cubs, who'd been allowed to watch from a safe observation area, started critiquing the cadets' strategies. And they were good at it. Turns out, when you're a natural pack hunter with problem-solving skills, tactical analysis comes pretty naturally. Maya, watching the cubs explain to a confused cadet why his flanking maneuver would never work, just smiled and sipped her coffee. Maybe Earth wasn't so unique after all. Maybe every species had its own version of chaos agents who needed someone to set boundaries with love and consequences. Admiral Krothos called her to his office afterward. Lieutenant Commander, I've been reviewing the incident reports. Sir, Maya said, standing at attention. You resolved a situation that we were considering evacuating the civilian section over. The cubs just needed direction, sir. You cleared your throat at them. With authority, sir. Krothos stared at her. With authority? Yes, sir. There was a long pause. Then Krothos pulled out a data pad. How would you feel about running a new course? cross-species developmental psychology, and practical child management. Maya blinked. Sir? Turns out, we're going to be hosting more cultural exchanges, including younglings from various species. Someone needs to teach our staff how to handle them. Someone who isn't afraid to clear their throat with authority. Maya thought about her workload. She thought about her nice, quiet life teaching tactics. She thought about the cubs who'd left her a drawing of all of them together with the words, "Best Human Teacher," scrawled in approximate spelling. I'm going to need a raise, sir. Already approved. And an assistant. Also approved. And unlimited access to the cafeteria coffee. Don't push your luck, Lieutenant Commander. Maya grinned. With respect, sir, I just faced down 12 apex predator cubs and one using only a throat clear. I think I've earned the coffee. Krothos's mandibles clicked in what might have been a laugh. Point taken. The coffee is yours. And that's how Maya Okonquo became the most terrifying and most beloved instructor at the Galactic Military Academy. She taught tactics to cadets and life lessons to younglings, and she never let anyone forget that sometimes the scariest thing in the galaxy isn't the 8-foot-tall apex predator. It's their mom voice, or in this case, their teaching assistant voice. Close enough. The cubs graduated from cafeteria service after their week was up, but they kept coming back to visit Maya. They'd bring her drawings. They'd show her new skills they learned. The big one with the white patch declared her his honor human, which was apparently a Krellian thing that meant Maya was basically adopted into the pack. Maya accepted this with grace and the demand for more coffee. Years later, when those cubs had grown into full-sized Krellian warriors serving in the fleet, they'd tell anyone who'd listen about the human teacher who'd stopped their reign of cafeteria terror with nothing but a look and a throat clear. They told it like a war story, because to them, it kind of was. She just stood there. The big one, now a decorated lieutenant, would say. And she did the throat thing, and we knew. We just knew we'd messed up. Didn't she make you clean tables? Someone would ask. For a week. Best week of my life. She taught us that discipline isn't punishment. It's structure. It's someone caring enough to teach you right from wrong. And somewhere on the station, in her office with her unlimited coffee and her stacks of papers to grade, Maya Okonquo would smile and shake her head. Because kids were kids, whether they had claws or not. And sometimes all they needed was someone to set boundaries with love. And maybe a really good throat clear. That's the thing about humans that the galaxy was still figuring out. They weren't just persistence, hunters. They weren't just creative problem solvers. They were also the species that had been domesticating everything in sight for thousands of years, not through force, but through a combination of firm boundaries, consistent consequences, and genuine affection. They'd made friends with wolves and turned them into dogs. They'd convinced cats to tolerate them. They'd taught horses to carry them and birds to land on their arms. They'd looked at every dangerous thing on their planet and said, "But what if we were friends, though?" So when the galaxy presented them with apex predator cubs causing chaos, humans didn't see a threat. They saw kids being kids. They saw an opportunity to teach. And if that teaching involved a strategically deployed throat clear and a raised eyebrow of pure judgment, well, that was just Earth's gift to the galaxy. Humans. They'll befriend you or discipline you, and somehow you'll be grateful for both. The cubs never stole another lunch. They did, however, steal a lot of hearts. But that's a different story. Maya finished her coffee, looked at the new class roster for her cross-species child development course, and sighed. 15 different species. 23 younglings total, including a group of Thraxian nestlings who were apparently pyrokinetic. She was going to need more coffee, and maybe a fire extinguisher. But she'd handle it, because that's what humans do. They look at impossible situations and figure it out. With authority, with love, with coffee, and with one really good throat clear in their back pocket, just in case. The end.